Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our very special event with Cathy Marie Buchanan in conversation with Pam Jenoff. My name is Kim Havens, and I'm the event manager here at An Unlikely Story. And I'm so very honored and excited to introduce these amazing authors to you this evening. Before we start, I'd like to just go over a few technical tips. If your picture is blurry, you can click on the Help button. It's on the top right-hand corner of your screen and choose Compatibility Mode. If you lose the connection or video, just completely exit out of your browser and jump right back in, and you'll immediately join the event. If you have questions for Cathy or for Pam, you can type them right into the Ask a Question box. It's right at the bottom of your screen. And if you see a question there that you would also like answered, you can upvote it and the most popular questions float to the top. Tonight, we are here with New York Times bestseller and book club favorite Cathy Marie Buchanan in celebration of her new book, Daughter of Black Lake. Daughter of Black Lake is a brilliantly unique, atmospheric historical family saga set during the Roman invasion of Britain. It pulls in readers with a touch of magic as the reader becomes enmeshed in the Druidic community on the shores of Black Lake and in the lives of Devout and her daughter Hobble. From Booklist Review, I love this quote, I had to share it. Buchanan has crafted an engrossing novel awash in historical atmosphere. From religious beliefs to cultural clashes to social stratification and the activities of daily life, Buchanan immerses readers in Roman Britain in this beautifully emotive tale of family, community, and love. Daughter of Black Lake was chosen as Best Fiction for Fall by Entertainment Weekly and Parade Magazine. Her previous novel, The Painted Girls, was a New York Times bestseller, a #1 national bestseller in Canada, and was named a Best Book of the Year by NPR, Good Housekeeping, and Goodreads. Her debut novel, The Day the Fall Stood Still, was a New York Times bestseller and a Canada Reads Top 40 Essential Canadian Novels of the Decade. Her work has been translated into 9 languages. Buchanan holds a BSc in Honors in Biochemistry and an MBA from Western University and recently became a certified yoga instructor. She's joining us from Toronto. So I've learned from Cathy that Cathy and I have a couple things in common from her highly entertaining Proust questionnaire on her website. Her idea of perfect happiness is laughing with her sons, and her oldest son is named Jack. We have the same thing in common. I'm officially adopting her motto, don't let the bastards grind you down. I needed it this morning. Cathy also has some absolutely amazing photos from her research trip, including some from Black Lake, so I highly recommend that you visit her website and check those out. Joining Cathy this evening is Pam Jenoff, the absolutely brilliant author of best-selling historical fiction novels, The Lost Girls of Paris, which I absolutely loved, and The Orphan's Tale. We welcomed Pam for an event for The Lost Girls of Paris, and I'm so delighted to welcome her back virtually for this event tonight. So, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Cathy Marie Buchanan and Pam Jenoff. There we go.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, Pam.
Hello, Cathy. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to have a conversation with you about your wonderful new book, Daughter of Black Lake. And I just want to say, to sort of step out of our conversation and say to everyone who's joining us, if you have not picked up this book yet, it is just such an original, rich, and engaging story. I guarantee that you're going to go right from our conversation to grab this book. So, Cathy,
thanks, Pam.
Oh, it's fabulous. It's fabulous. I see so many books, and this is just so original. So, Cathy, why don't you start out by telling us how you came to such an original story? I'm going to overuse that word tonight, but how did you come to this novel premise for your book?
Okay, so it's kind of a kooky story, but about almost 20 years ago, I opened up the newspaper to see a photograph of an unnervingly well-preserved 2,000-year-old body. So in this photograph, despite this body being 2,000 years old, you could see the wrinkles in the skin, you could see the razor stubble, you could see the braid of rope, the noose that was still around the neck. I learned from the article that the chemical nature of the peat bog that the body was dug up from had preserved the flesh and skin over 2,000 years, in this incredible way. I got really curious. I started reading about more so-called bog bodies, and the one I particularly fixated on was a bog body called Lindo Man. So Lindo Man is a body that went into the peat bog formed by the once much larger Black Lake, so it's a real place, about 2,000 years ago. So this lake is at Black Lake is in Cheshire, UK. The scientists have really extensively studied this body, and they know that before it was deposited into the bog, that it was killed in a ritualistic way. Its head was bashed, its throat was garroted, and the neck was slit. So there's belief that this sort of overkilling was what was done to honor multiple gods at one time. So I started wondering about what kind of community would, practice human sacrifice to ensure the crops, or maybe to, ensure success on the battlefield. But I also thought a lot about sort of the beauty and simplicity of a community that, lived and breathed its daily and seasonal rituals, and that was bound to the land in the extraordinary way. Anyway, I decided that using what we know about Lindo Man, this bog body, as bedrock, I would write a story that explored living in the Iron Age, so in pagan Britain 2,000 years ago. And it would take a look, at the superstitions, the pagan traditions, the close ties to the natural world, and also the wrath and mercy of the gods.
Fascinating. It's such a rich history to get to the book. And now for those who haven't been fortunate enough to read it or look up much on the book yet, I would love you to just start us off. Give us kind of the where the story begins and what we need to know.
Yeah. Okay. So at its core, Daughter of Black Lake is a story of love and survival set 2,000 years ago in the northern misty boglands of pagan Britain. So the book is narrated by Devout, who is Black Lake's healer, and by Hobble, who is Devout's 13-year-old daughter. In the chapters that are Devout's, we hear about the love triangle that she has in her youth, and then over the rest of the story, we find out about the far-reaching implications of this love triangle. Hobble her story is set 17 years later. So she's 13 years old, and Hobble is called Hobble because she walks with a limp. It's not the only thing that sets her apart at Black Lake, though. Hobble is also a seer, so she is having visions of the future. And these two things, this limp and this ability to see into the future, really put her in peril. As true to history, the Romans are invading and making their way across Britannia, drawing ever closer to this once, isolated, remote settlement that has sort of quietly lived without Roman influence, but that's all about to change.
Fascinating. One theme that really struck me as I read the book are the women and kind of the relationships between the women that are so present in this book in a way that is both unique and timeless. So can you say a little bit about that for us?
Well, the central relationship between women is between Hobble and her mother, Devout. So the mother-daughter relationship, the book is actually dedicated to my mom, with much admiration and gratitude. So, I did talk about Hobble being put under threat, and her family is prepared to, do whatever it takes to help their young daughter. Because Devout is Black Lake's healer, she is intimately involved with all the women in the community in terms of providing remedies. She knows all their, physical weaknesses and physical strengths and these kinds of things. She is the one that brings the babies into the world, and she's teaching Hobble what she knows. So Hobble is also, really tied to all the community at Black Lake.
So this book has so much ritual in it, and I'm fascinated by this notion of ritual that you've woven into the story. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so there is a ton of ritual. With the least provocation, the bog dwellers at Black Lake drop onto bended knee. They touch their lips, and then the ground at their feet to honor Mother Earth. After they've planted the fields, they bury loaves to honor the gods. There is a festival that marks the advent of each of the different seasons. And I think, back 2,000 years ago, without science to explain lots of things like, why the weather might change or why a crop might fail, the bog dwellers at Black Lake must have lived with a great deal of uncertainty. So I think that ritual would probably was a way for them to bring order into their lives. I think they probably innately understood the sort of sense of peace that would come by following, a prescribed set of steps. It's kind of interesting given these uncertain times that we're living right now, and it does make me wonder about, whether we might fare a little better if we sort of upped the ritual content in our daily lives.
And related to that, another really interesting theme you've woven in is magic, which just seems like such a unique topic for this book. Can you explain sort of how did you come to do that? Exactly?
Yeah. Okay. So the book is steeped in magic. So we already mentioned that Hobble is a seer. There are omens that prove true in the book. There is a moment where, someone swallows a handful of seeds and a sort of astonishing result happens. And again, I think, without science to explain the origins of mankind and to explain the nighttime sky, it would be natural for the bog dwellers to turn to magic to explain the world all around them. So Devout, the book's healer, when she is making her remedies, she doesn't think, oh, I'm, getting the chemical compound out of the meadowsweet and that will cure the aching head. She believes that she is drawing Mother Earth's magic from the plants. And that's what is, in fact, curing the aching head. So she is, magic is certainly integral to her explanation of why it is that these compounds that she makes works. I think I incorporated magic, because it would have been integral to their lives, but also, when a writer decides to undertake a book, she is committing to having her head in a particular place for a couple of years. And for me, the idea of being in a place that was full of mystery and magic really appealed to me. I remember kind of when I sort of really got onto the magic thing, it was a really wonderful, I had a research trip to Britain, and one of the sites I visited was called Butser Ancient Farm. So there are great pictures of that place on my website if anyone wants to take a look. But Butser Ancient Farm, it's sort of like what we would call, a pioneer village-like complex, except rather than being dedicated to pioneer times, it's dedicated to educating about life in the Iron Age. So I get to Butser Ancient Farm. There's a wattle enclosure, a fence surrounding 6 roundhouses, the types of houses that the different clans would have lived in. And as I passed into that enclosure, I really felt like I was taking a step back in history. I went into one of the roundhouses, impatiently waited for my eyes to adjust to the dim light. I could see the Celtic motifs on the wall, the bed covered in homespun wool and furs. I could see the plant-dyed wool hanging, the cauldron, hanging in the center of the roundhouse, the thatch ceiling. It really struck me as the most sort of magical place. And, as I wandered around Butser Ancient Farm that day, I was completely charmed. And certainly when I was writing Daughter of Black Lake, I, went back to that, tapped into that sort of magical day and that kind of feeling of mystery and magic that I felt really permeated Butser Ancient Farm.
So as the reader, I have to just interject and say that all this magic and ritual is just the perfect mood and theme for like this kind of fall, coming up to Halloween. And it's really very evocative when you just sit there and read it.
I mean, I've had a couple of readers and comment, it's come up multiple times now that they're so ready to be transported out of our world and into something that's quite different from our world right now. So I think I love that idea too. So.
Yeah, no. And so you talked as a writer about spending a couple years in this time period. And I write
Right.
historical fiction as well. So I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by process, by research process.
Right.
Exactly. But when I research, it's the 20th century. And here
Right.
you are in first century Britain. So can you tell us how that works and how you go
Yeah.
about it?
Yeah, I mean, my first two novels were set a lot more recently. So one was set during World War I, and one is set in the 1880s in Paris. So, you know, what I have done for all three of those books, and the fourth one that I'm working on is, you know, I begin by probably there's a 4 to 6 month period where I'm just researching, and that mostly involves reading different texts and often reading literature of the day. And what has happened during that period, for my first two books anyways, was I get a really clear picture of this time and place that I'm trying to capture. Alarmingly, this did not happen for Daughter of Black Lake. I kept reading, and I was getting super frustrated. And I think there were a couple of problems. One, 2,000 years ago, the Britons did not have the written word, so they did not leave us a written record of how they lived their lives. We do have the archaeological record, but you know, this was incredibly frustrating because there would be a particular artifact and it would be interpreted by two different archaeologists in two very different ways. One would say it was for cooking, the next would say it was for ceremony. So, you know, in a quandary, I ended up hiring an expert in an archaeologist with expertise in Iron Age Britain to take me on a tour of the relevant sites in the UK and also a lot of the museums over there. And I remember a real moment of epiphany on that trip. We were standing looking at one of the distant hilltops that is ringed with, you know, ramparts and ditches. And as we were standing there gazing, Willie, my archaeologist friend, tells me there are about 3,300 of these so-called hill forts dotting the British landscape. And then he goes on to tell me that some archaeologists believe they were defensive in nature, while others believe they were ceremonial. Some believe they were inhabited. Some evidence says they weren't. Some evidence says they were cattle enclosures. And I just stood there and I was like, I get it. I'm not going to get this clear picture of life in the Iron Age. I'm going to have to create a world based on, you know, informed speculation and imagination, much more so than for my other books. So that was in fact what happened. So yeah, it was a really liberating moment. You know, because I mean, when I was writing The Painted Girls, for example, like when Marie Van Goten is walking down such and such a street and looking at such and such a door, it was really there, you know. So this was just different than that.
That's fascinating. And I'm listening to you describe these grand research trips, and I'm thinking, I remember research trips, you know, because our world has been so changed.
That quaint old thing we used to do.
I know. So I'm curious how you were you're launching a book in this really interesting time, right? But you're also a writer in this really interesting era that we're in right now. So I'm wondering if you have any reflections on how things have changed for you, either creatively or in terms of a book coming out.
I mean, the beginning of the pandemic, I just couldn't write. I just was, I mean, I need a calm, you know, mind, focused mind to do my best writing. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I was obsessed with the news. You know, I think like many people, my ability to focus was like down the tubes. And then there was a couple months where I was just preparing to launch a book, and that involved learning of a whole bunch of new things, like, you know, how to do virtual events and this kind of stuff. And then sort of the social media demands were really upped too with the pandemic. So I learned a whole bunch of new tricks there. And I've only recently, like in the last couple of days, returned to writing. And that is a wonderful thing to go back to for me. So yeah, I'm happy to be doing that.
That's tremendous. And so I have not had a book out during the pandemic, so I will be circling around to you for all your tips and tricks, right, going forward from what you
it's really different. I mean, there's some really cool stuff. Like, you know, I had a virtual launch party up in Canada. So there was 18 different independent booksellers all the way across Canada. So all the way from Victoria, which is on the West Coast, to Halifax, which is on the East Coast, you know, booksellers across the country. And normally when I have a launch party in Toronto, it's my Toronto friends that come. But, you know, there was hundreds of people from all across Canada. So that was kind of cool. And even tonight, I mean, I'm assume I haven't met all of you before, and probably wouldn't if we didn't have virtual events. So there is that opportunity. But I do miss, like, it would be lovely to go and actually go to another story with Pam and shake hands and, sit down and have a real chat. So I do miss meeting booksellers, other authors, meeting my public in person. But, this is what we got, so we're working with it.
Well, I will take a rain check on that, because I will tell you that An Unlikely Story is one of the most incredible stores I've ever visited. It's one of the most memorable events I've ever done. And so as soon as you are able, we will rush.
Okay, I get that vibe.
Yeah, it's really, really special.
Great.
Really, really special. So you talked about research process, and you touched on your writing process, but I'm always fascinated. Tell us about your writing process and kind of how a book comes to life for you.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, there's this research period up front. And then, as Pam knows, as a historical fiction author, I mean, when I'm writing, there's barely a day passes where I don't have to go and check some little detail. And, so it definitely slows you down, for sure. But I love writing about another time and place and about immersing myself in another time and place. And I think it might be connected to my love of travel. There's nothing I like better than getting off an airplane, and it smells different, it looks different, and the food is different, and the language is different. And, so I think you kind of have that opportunity when you write historical fiction to do that. And also, I mean, I've been all over the place sometimes in terms of my time periods. And I kind of like that too, even though it's probably harder to get your head around a new time and place than to, continually set in whatever, World War II or something like that. So I do love the research process. I am a writer who has to be told to stop researching and get writing. I think it can be a wonderful procrastination technique. The toughest part of writing a book for me is first draft. And I think there's a couple reasons why first draft is so tricky. One, you have a million decisions to make in front of you. And some of them are flippant, trivial little decisions. What color is someone's hair going to be? But some of them are tough, right? So is Devout going to fall in love with Ark, or is Devout going to fall in love with young Smith? And it feels like if you make a wrong choice at one of those points, you might waste a whole bunch of time, or maybe it will mean you write a crappy book, right? So that's tricky. And I have a little, when people talk about writer's block, I don't think I experience writer's block as a dearth of creativity, but almost every time I start a new chapter when I'm writing first draft, I have a staring at that blank page kind of moment, almost afraid to commit to what I know I have to accomplish in that chapter. And the second thing that I think is really tricky about writing first draft is when you're writing first draft, I don't know my characters. So I've tried, doing the Proust questionnaire for my characters ahead of time. I try writing character lists, but for me, I really get to know my characters through the writing process, and it takes a long time. So I'm going to say that I don't really feel like I know my characters until I'm sort of 2/3 of the way through the first draft. And before that point, they're erratic, they're inconsistent, their physical looks are changing, the way they behave is changing, sometimes their names are changing. And then there comes this beautiful moment when they stop feeling like these phony, not real characters, and they kind of emerge as real flesh and blood people. And like, how your husband's going to react in a certain situation, or what your girlfriend will say in response to a certain thing, it starts to become like that. And the characters really do sort of help lead you through the story. I've heard other writers talk about this moment. I've heard writers say things like, the character spoke to me, or I found my voice, or the book wrote itself. I mean, I haven't had that experience yet, but I think we're all talking about this same moment when the characters start to feel real, and it's such a wonderful thing when it happens. So writing first draft is tough. The rewriting has generally been my favorite part of the whole process. So you get to clean up all that mess you wrote during your first draft. The themes start to become really apparent, so you can draw them out. You can really finesse the language. I've traditionally liked writing. Rewriting has been my favorite part. But with the Daughter of Black Lake, there was so much rewriting that I am so happy to be writing first draft again.
I was just going to say, I hate rewriting. Will you do my rewriting for me?
Yeah.
I'll write your first drafts and you do the rewriting.
Yeah.
There we go.
Honestly, like this book, so the book goes back and forth in between these two characters, and it goes back and forth 17 years. And at one point, I rewrote the whole book chronologically. The chapters that are all told by Hobble used to be told by Smith. So he's her dad. So right now they're told by a 13-year-old girl, and they used to be told by, a 30-year-old man. So that really changed things. And actually, when I made that decision to write from Hobble's point of view, I actually feel like that was when the book really came together. And it's kind of interesting because one of my, you know her as well, Pam, but one of my writer friends, Anya Sato, she's an early reader for me, and she read it, I don't know, probably 4 years ago or something. And she said, I wish you were writing from Hobble's point of view, and I was like, that's way too much work. I'm not doing that. And then lo and behold, 3 years later, I spend
you can't outrun that. You can't outrun the honest feedback. I know. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I could keep talking all night and asking you questions, but I see that questions are piling up in the queue. So I'm wondering if we want to go, Kim, maybe to some questions.
Sure. Hello.
Hi.
Pam. Awesome. Oh my gosh. I could just listen to you guys talk about writing. So, Cathy, so how many drafts do you end up doing? How long did it take you from the first draft to
I bet I wrote 20 drafts. So for my other two books, the part, like once the publisher buys it and you're working with a professional editor, that had sort of been 4 or 6 months for my other books. And for this book, it was 2 years. And God bless my editors. They never gave up on me. But, there was lots of times when I felt like chucking the book out the window. But perseverance. I'm a perseverer.
Wow. So why Iron Age Britain? I think there are other different times where there have been bog. So what made you pick that particular?
Yeah, I guess it's because I got so fascinated with Lindo Man, and so much study has been done of Lindo Man, and there is a lot of informed speculation that he was in fact a Druid. So I was curious about exploring the life of a Druid. So he was the body that I decided to write about, and we know from carbon dating that he is, did live and breathe in first century near Cheshire, UK. So that's what I decided to explore. So, I think the Druid thing is really fascinating. So the Druids were the high priests of the time. So they were the keepers of knowledge, the astronomers, the philosophers, the historians, the judges, the lawmakers. And in modern day paganism, the Druids are generally viewed quite favorably. And I've taken a bit of heat, I would say, for having Fox, the Druid character in Daughter of Black Lake. He's not a good guy, right? So, but there's also lots of evidence, if you look, that the Druids were not all good people. So, for example, if you look at the mythology of the British Isles, which we assume is grounded in, what as myth is, in some kind of event, although things get embellished along the way, but there's the Druids that in one of the myths, they turn a maiden into a deer. In another myth, they turn the warriors into stone. We see Druids, blighting entire crops. And then the Romans, we know from the Roman record that the Druids did practice human sacrifice. And we also know that the Druids, really encouraged rebellion among the Britons. And even though it wasn't a rebellion that they could win, we've got this ragtag horde of, British warriors facing the well-oiled, well-drilled, well-armored, massive Roman army. They didn't stand a chance, but the Druids do not want to lose their way of life, right? They have ruled with absolute authority. They are in control, and they don't want to lose that.
That is fascinating. So, Wendy would like to know, what are you both reading now?
Reading?
Yeah.
I'm reading this really awesome book.
Oh,
I saw that.
Sweet of you.
So good.
It's called The Lost Girls of Paris. It's something I knew absolutely nothing of. So Pam wrote it, if everyone can't see that. But it follows a couple of women who are sort of saboteur, spy type people during World War II. And I just did not know that this
Thank you.
a thing, and it is fascinating and it's beautifully written. So I'm learning a ton, and that's one of the things I like about historical fiction, but it's also like, you know, I'm into it.
Wow. Well, thank you. Well, I obviously read Daughter of Black Lake, you know, deeply, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. What am I reading? Can I be honest and say in COVID, stay at home, it is fits and spurts, right? So, you know, it depends. I mean, I've got 3 kids homeschooling, so it's all over the place. But the thing that broke me out of my reading slump first was Ghosts of Harvard by Francesca Saratella. Was amazing, and that was actually back in the spring. More recently, I've been reading some galleys. So I just read a galley of Karen White's forthcoming book, which I don't want to get titles wrong off the cuff. I think it's The Last Night in London, which was amazing. I just read a galley called The Mystery Writer, which is about Agatha Christie, and there's more than one book coming out by Agatha Christie this year, but that was a great one. So I'm completely blanking, but those are a few of the recent titles.
Another book I should mention is I recently read Therese Ann Fowler's A Good Neighborhood, and I love that, and it's super relevant to our time.
Good.
It's like a crazy page turner, and yeah, I mean,
that was
very relevant in terms of Black Lives Matter, and really wonderful book.
So well done. Like it was just, that was one of the, I have to admit, for the first month, I couldn't read at all. Like it took me a while. I just I was like, ooh, it's like the world's longest snow day, and I'm stuck at home all snuggy, and I'm like, and I can't read. It's the worst punishment ever. Like, this is just bad. 2020, go away.
I know.
Yeah.
So, let's see. So that was that one. So what other historical fiction books can you recommend? So do you have any other, have you read other Iron Age books from that era, Cathy?
I haven't actually. I haven't. Yeah, I mean, when I'm writing, I really I don't not read. I always read, but I know a lot of writers steer clear of reading fiction altogether. I don't, but I do steer clear of reading fiction that is set in my time period. I'm always afraid that it's going to make me afraid if it's different than mine, and if it's the same, that'll make me afraid too. So I do read other stuff. So I haven't, and there isn't actually a lot of fiction set during the Iron Age, which was one of the things that the publishers really loved about it, was that, you know, the world building aspect of it, and sort of the, you know, I'm presenting a time and place that people haven't had a heck of a lot of exposure to in general. So, yeah.
Wow. And what are some of your favorite historical fiction books?
Oh, how to choose. I read everything that comes across the transom, though not necessarily when I'm working on that time period, you know. But there are just so many wonderful authors writing in that period. So, of course, our mutual friend Jenna Blum has many wonderful books. Really love Gillian Cantor, Christina McMorris, Sarah McCoy. You know, I can just go on and on with that list. If I don't want to mention exclusively women. So let me say I really enjoy books by Ron Balson, Andrew Gross, as well.
Yeah. I'm just thinking, I also read The Exiles recently, Christina Baker Klein, which is fantastic.
That was so good. Yeah, that was
and
fantastic.
Then I like, you know, like I reread recently A Year of Wonder, Geraldine Brooks, so her pandemic book, and I read it, you know, 15 years ago, and it was interesting to read it again now and understand that there's social distancing, and
So now I have to think of the oh my gosh. So I read a book also about the plague, and it was it Emma Klein?
There's Emily St. Mandel wrote Station 11, which is, it's like a sort of apocalyptic after a plague kind of thing. That was amazing.
Yeah. No, it was all right, I'm not going to think of it now, but it was it was fantastic, and it was about the plague, and it was in Ireland during the 1918 flu epidemic. Maybe Cassie, you could look it up for me. Oh, Emma 22. Yeah, thank you, Whitney. Full of stars. It was so good, and for whatever reason, it was very comforting to me. Like, and I think that's the best thing about history. That, you know, gone through it before and gone through it, and we'll get through it again. So for whatever reason, I found that so comforting.
And Sue Meissner has a book, which of course the name is escaping me right now, but it is set during the flu pandemic in Philadelphia in 1918.
Maybe Wendy will find that one for you as well. But I have found that historical fiction has been enormously, kind of satisfying. I found I couldn't read anything that was like a whodunit mystery that my brain had to think of who it was. I had no patience.
Right, I understand.
Yeah.
Well,
So
one thing I always think we historical fiction writers have a heavy lift on the research, but I don't envy the present day writers who are going to have to grapple with how to put COVID in their books and if they're going to do it. We don't have to do that.
right. Well, Jeff kind of did it with his book, The Deep End, because he was talking about, they're kind of isolated. There were certain elements that he added into it that I found really interesting, kind of being stuck with your family and not being able to leave without actually going.
Very relevant. I know that's not what we're talking about, but Jeff Kinney having a book out today is a very big deal in our house with small children.
I remember that.
It is. It was kind of like when the new Legos would come out, it was like the release day and your kids are like, they're lined up. So it's good books are kind of keeping us, well, they're definitely keeping me going. I think they're also keeping a lot of people going through the time.
Yeah.
As Bright as Heaven.
That's the Sue Meissner. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Wendy, she's got us all going on.
Yeah.
So do you have another project in the works? And is it anything you can talk to us about?
Please, Cathy, go.
Okay, I can talk a little bit about mine. So I've gone all the way back to 1962. I'm like steering clear of 2,000 years ago. So far the research seems like a breeze compared to 2,000 years ago. But it's set during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I'm writing from a bunch of different points of views, and it takes place over 5 days of the crisis. So it starts the day that Kennedy comes on and says the Russians have missiles that can, blow up North America, aimed at us, and it will end the day that crisis is resolved. So
wow.
Fabulous.
What kind of research do you do for that? I mean,
mostly involved a whole bunch of reading. I'm going to go to Cuba because part of it is set on the. Well, I don't know. I don't even know if I'll get permission. I've tried to get permission and so far I've failed. But I wanted to go to Guantanamo Bay, which is where the part that's in Cuba is set. Although I've got really good resources, so if I don't go, it won't be the end of the world. But I don't know. I really like to go where I'm writing about, and I always feel like something kind of magical happens, even if I think I've done my research. When I actually go, I don't know, there's something that permeates me somehow.
I want to go somewhere.
I really can't go anywhere. Yes, those are books. That's what
for me. It's 2 answers on the forthcoming. So the real forthcoming, which will be landing hopefully to you, Kim, within weeks, is my next book is called The Woman with the Blue Star and comes out May 4th. So we are like the birth of a cover and a galley are any minute now, and I'm really, really excited about that. And that I can tell you, it is about. It's inspired by a true story of a young woman who survived World War II in a sewer. So it's an incredibly beautiful story, and she looks up through the grate and she sees a young girl her own age on the street, and sort of the disparity strikes her. And in my book, it's fictitiously about the relationship that evolves between those 2 women. So
cool.
That is very cool. Awesome. All right.
How did you come on to that? Like, where did you get the little tidbit that story came from?
It's such a long process, right? But these days, I mean, I actually go looking for the ideas. I find these days, I have to be sort of really focused in what I find and the conversation with my publisher about what people want to read. And so I go through multiple ideas before, and they're like, I'll be really excited about them, and they'll be like, no, not good. Until you finally get that like moment of finding the right idea.
I don't talk to my publisher. I just write. I mean, I talk to them once I give them the book, but I've never talked to them beforehand about ideas.
Yeah, we have a very detailed.
I know they're super pumped about the whole Cuban Missile Crisis thing. So yeah,
that's great. That's awesome.
So Cathy, did you always know that magic was going to be part of the book, or was there a certain time that you decided you were going to include the magical elements?
I mean, because we don't have the written historical record, I spent a lot of time, delving into the mythology of the British Isles. And it's full of magic, and then it just made me think this is the way that people explain their world. So it kind of necessitated it being full of magic. And I have to say, like, some of my I loved thinking about, these old traditions and superstitions that have survived across the millennia. And it was so interesting to me to find like these old superstitions or traditions that we still see in our modern day practices. So, for example, from the archaeological record, we know that the Britons often threw beloved objects, or valuable objects, so, highly decorated swords, beautiful cauldrons, into watery places, so into bogs or into springs, and then we find them in modern day, right? So we know this happened. And we assume they did this to honor the gods. But if you think about what we do now, we throw coins into fountains,
right,
for good luck. And I have to believe that modern day superstition or tradition came from, the Iron Age tradition of throwing things into watery places. And I do, I think there will be moments when readers are reading the book where they see something in the book and they say, aha, and that's why we carried rides over the threshold, or aha, that's that's where the jack-o'-lantern came from. So I was having a good time making those connections when I was researching, and I think readers will have a good time figuring them out while they're reading. So yeah,
I love that. I love seeing those connections.
Yeah.
Wow, excellent.
And I do, I have to say, like, I do love the idea of readers sort of embracing the mystery and magic that is threaded throughout the story, and especially in this time we're living in right now. And I do think that, it fills me with pleasure to think of the book opening a tiny crack onto seeing sort of the astonishing that does exist in our everyday lives.
So are there any magical elements that you've had in your life?
I was asked the other day, do I believe in magic? And I had to think long and hard about it. And I would say I'm spiritual, which is magic, I suppose, right? So I'm a practicing yogi. I've been practicing for 20 years. Yoga is a spiritual practice. A year and a half ago, I went to Ecuador for a magical month and did my teacher training. So, certainly when I'm practicing yoga and I'm having a good, experience with it, I do feel very connected to the world and the people all around me. So I'd say that's a kind of magic. And then I also experience magic, I would say, a lot when I'm in nature. And it's, for me, it's a sense of awe, right? So I'm a big canoe tripper. And, I've had moments where the mist is rising off the water and a heron takes flight. And I, just am filled with awe. And I feel that, our world is so complicated and so beautiful that it's hard to believe it's the product of random mutations, and natural selection and nothing else, right?
And I think just find like all the things going on now that those moments when they come along that you appreciate them so much more. Like I find when something like that happens, like this moment, I'm like, oh, this is, I'm just going to put this in this little bubble and carry it around with me.
Yeah. And I do think, we have lost with, sort of in Daughter of Black Lake, the bog dwellers are so connected to the natural world. They have to be. It's their sustenance. It's their medicine. It's what they build their houses from, so they're so reliant on the natural world, and it's so much a part of their every waking moment, and I do feel like as we've moved away from the natural world, we've lost sort of that kind of awe that we have for nature. So I do think that, I like nature a lot.
Yeah, me too. Awesome. Well, oh my gosh, this has been so fantastic. And I can't thank you both enough for being there. I kind of feel like, they talk about like Jeff's book where the pictures of the little islands that you read towards, like my author events are my little bubbles that keep me going. I'm like, let me just get going to my next event. They do. You guys bring us such joy and escape from all the stressful things that are going on. And, and I think historical fiction is so comforting. So thank you so much for what you both do.
Till our next island. I will see you on
Yeah,
Styling.
my great pleasure. Thank you so much for hosting us tonight. Another story. And Pam, thank
Yeah.
you so much. I know that we're all like kind of crazy busy these days, and you're homeschooling kids and teaching law school and writing novels. And I'm so grateful that you could fit me in. So
The honor was truly mine. It's a great book. Thank you.
Yes, I was so delighted when I heard you were joining us, Pam. I have to tell you, they were like, "Oh, we got Pam Jenoff."
I know. I was like, I love Kim. Mwah. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.